Chapter 5. Hector awoke in the early light of Friday morning. A mourning dove was cooing outside, and he could feel the big house in its emptiness. It was too early to get up, but his mind was already up and running. After some time passed, he accepted that falling back asleep would not be an option that morning. All the movements and demands of the week crowded his mind. It had all been a blur of unpacking bags, orientation manuals, evening socializing, and the anticipation of his summer residency. A gentle breeze came in through the windows, and the white walls of his bedroom reflected sunbeams that cut paths through the blinds. The evening's piano negotiations crossed his mind, causing him to smile to himself. The next thought he had was of the piano out back. If he wasn't going to sleep, then he'd make some coffee and stumble back to relax in the small forest before driving downtown. Summer sunshine doesn't allow the morning dew to sit for long. The grass was cool and moist, but it would soon be warming and eventually radiating humidity. Around the green space of the hilltop, it was all stillness and birds. Tables and chairs from the night before were now vacant, quietly behaving and awaiting their departure. The May breeze was cool to Hector's arms. He placed his coffee on the top of the ocean green's piano and then sat at the bench. It was cool in the small meadow between the trees. Squirrels ran across the dirt and up the branches, only to stop nervously and observe the long-haired visitor and his coffee. The coming weeks were something for him to look forward to. He could settle into a routine, and he'd no longer have to think so much about the strategies that come with first impressions and punctual arrivals. Looking at his phone on the piano bench, time passed until he realized he'd lost track of his plans and would soon be running late. After parking below Union Station, he made his way past the low hallways into the meeting place near the information desk. Hector was looking for two individuals. One old man in an ocean green foundation t-shirt and a younger man in a yellow polo. He looked around to spot the individuals until realizing he'd arrived too early. It was always annoying to show up too early, but he preferred it to being late. Wearing his blue Oxford and his bucket hat, Hector felt correctly dressed for the situation. The hat always brought him additional comfort and peace of mind under the bright sun. The blue Oxford was for good luck, and it was also causing him to perspire. "You must be Hector," an old man called. As planned, he wore a trucker hat with a bird on it and tucked-in ocean green foundation t-shirt. "That's me, and you must be Rob." "That's correct. I'm Rob Sanderson, and that guy over there making his way toward us, that's Martin Andreas." Martin was amongst the crowd exiting one of the echoing terminal halls. He wore the same yellow polo that Hector had been instructed to wear while guiding tours. His head was buzzed and his chin held a finely curated, thin-cut beard that had a technical aspect to it. He was tall and somewhere around his early 30s. "Here he is," Rob announced with his colleague's arrival. "Well, hello, Martin. Good afternoon." Martin nodded as Rob started the introduction. "Hector, this is Martin. Martin, meet our summer ocean green resident, Hector Alvarez." "Good to meet you, Martin," Hector said. "I think we spoke on the phone about the house tours a few weeks back. Always good to put a face to a name." Martin seemed distracted by something in the area, and Hector repeated himself optimistically, hoping Martin would respond after a second try. "Did we, man? Wait, what's your name again?" "Hector. Hector Alvarez." "Lecter? Sorry, it's loud, man. Abrago," Hector replied. "What? Oh, that's right, Hector," Martin said as he forced a second handshake. "My bad, I meet a lot of people guiding these tours," he replied with an empty face. "All good," Hector said with a growing interest in his new colleague's disposition. "It is a bit loud in here, isn't it?" Rob remarked as he motioned toward a set of doors leading outside. "Let's step out into the courtyard and we can get started with showing Hector how we guide these tours." The Ocean Green Foundation led historic architecture tours around downtown and other districts that had historically relevant structures. Tours varied and scheduling shifted based on the bookings and general demand. In the 1990s, the tours were few and far between. That was during the post-LA riot era when the city was a ghost town and more of an imaginary battlefield as a result of the era's films and news coverage. But Hector's generation had a different relationship with downtown. Since the age of 11, he'd been taking trains and catching rides there whenever he could. His desire to push through the buildings and plazas of Los Angeles outweighed any hesitations. Rob began leading the small crew toward the exit for the courtyard. They walked beneath the thick beams and decorative wooden rafters. Crowds of passengers hurried past them like schools of fish. The echoes from the high ceilings and the breezeways were replaced by the sound of idling cars, harping brakes, and parking enforcement officers in the passenger pickup area. The station had undergone renovations, but it still had that smell that Hector would find in all the old buildings in LA. It was similar to the smell of the ocean greenhouse, which was something like a mix of wood and dusty cement, steeped in sun and desert dust, with traces of salt water. Hector liked this smell. John and Donald Parkinson really did this right, wouldn't you say, gentlemen? Rob commented with a smile. They really did, Hector replied. Union Station is really something, but I have a love-hate relationship with this place. Its history compromises its beauty a bit for me. Did the city really have to build in this location and displace the Chinese community of folks living here? It's not like there wasn't miles and miles of empty orchard land that they could have used as an alternative, you know? Rob listened politely as Hector continued. It's beautiful, no doubt about it, Rob, but do you talk at all about the Chinese Exclusion Act aspect of LA history on these tours? Martin stood silent with a blank face. Hector immediately felt an internal confirmation that it would in fact be a draining morning, but the enthusiasm from Rob gave him a reassured feeling. Rob had the humming frequency of those individuals that loved what they were doing. People like him always radiated clearly to Hector. It reminded him of when he'd first understood this same dedication in other skateboarders when he was younger. Rob loved the city's architecture and its history the same way Hector did. But Rob had decades of experience alongside his love and appreciation. Hector could only have the level of expertise and time if he focused and pushed himself. It wasn't always this crisp and clean here, Martin spoke assuredly. Back in the day, cigar soot covered the walls and high ceilings. When my grandpa was a kid, they finally got around to scrubbing it off and touching it up. He saw them scrubbing for weeks, the cigar sludge. It was disgusting. Rob led them up through Olvera Street and then up the cement stairs alongside the 101 freeway. They jaywalked across an ill-advised section of Hill Street where a fast city bus startled Hector. Rob eventually stopped the small group at a bare, leafless tree that stood crooked and alone in a patch of dirt on the bridge above Cesar Chavez Avenue. You see this thing? It has no historic relevance whatsoever, but sometimes there's a real big crow, a raven perhaps, that sets up shop here. And come to think of it, I really think these branches must have one of the best views of downtown. Like it is for the raven, and for us, it would always be a game of keeping our eyes open to see what all these speeding cars don't care to see. And that's where you'll find the good stuff, Rob said as he looked across the freeway. Look and listen, boys, he announced, smiling to himself. Okay, now onward, up Bunker Hilltop, and after that we'll head down to the Bradbury Building. The group walked over the freeway in the direction of the music center. As if to compete with Hector, Martin discussed how the tours addressed things like the communities of Old Bunker Hill and Chavez Ravine. Hector could feel a competitive spirit emerging in the way he spoke, with a quickening pace and edge to his cadence. But skateboarding had taught Hector at an early age not to engage in foolish, indirect forms of competition. Whether athletic or scholastic, it had the same result. It was bad style. As they began their walk through the Bunker Hill corridor, Hector took a mental inventory of the granite plazas and spaces beneath LA high-rises that offered the best and snappiest flat ground. He'd come to find that A.C. Martin and Associates was the architecture firm responsible for some of his favorite skate spots. There were the Dill Ledges, also known as the Department of Water and Power. Down the hill was City National Plaza, which Hector and his friends had always referred to plainly as Arco. It was a plaza with nearly perfect granite flat ground and gold handrails. Further out from downtown there was Fairfax High School, which made up for its lack of granite with an ideal layout of ledges and shaded cement. While the A.C. Martin group couldn't take credit for outliers like Beneficial Plaza and the Santa Monica Courthouse, Hector remained stubborn with the point of view that their canon of meaningful spaces should be celebrated over all the rest. Walking across the Music Center Plaza, Hector could see the Department of Water and Power on the other side of the street. This was the crown jewel of Los Angeles skate spots. The smooth granite bridge over the reflection pool surrounding it led to the best granite benches in all of California. But the county sheriffs at the front desk had threatened Hector with their zip ties one too many times, so he hadn't skated there in almost a decade. On Bunker Hill, one of the only options for smooth granite ground and no security was the Stanley Mosque Courthouse. Somehow the security didn't mind when Hector and his friends met there. They'd skate back and forth for hours below the statues at the entrance: Moses, Charlemagne, and Thomas Jefferson. When Hector's parents expressed concern for the unstructured nature of skateboarding, he'd joke and assure them that these statues would be considered adult supervision. Hector's stomach was activated by the time they'd made it to their final stop at the Bradbury building. From the movements in his intestines, he suspected a thin, textured, and highly explosive threat. It was the worst kind of bowel activity because of its unpredictable nature. Under average circumstances, if prompted to release gas, he could easily do so and relieve some pressure in his stomach. But this kind of suspected thin texture, which wasn't quite diarrhea but possibly close, was too high risk and could jeopardize the entire afternoon. Hector expedited his goodbyes with Rob and Martin before finding a public restroom at a nearby coffee shop. The day was hot and bright in the afternoon hours. He cut through Grand Central Market and made his way to Pershing Square. As always, it was busy with city commuters from the metro station alongside homeless locals, sleeping in the shade. Hector walked around the park benches and on top of the stucco planters. He made sure to look, listen, and smell his surroundings to avoid the strong scent of urine, which would always make him throw up without delay if it was powerful enough. The Beethoven statue stood with its back to a few of the park's other memorials. Hector's stomach dropped at the thought of his Sunday visits there growing up. He remembered a joke his father would say to his mother during visits there when he was a boy. "If there's one thing we know about its immortal beloved, we know it wasn't Pershing Square." Beethoven was right there, though, in this forgotten corner of a city that didn't care enough to give him a view, like a caged animal that had given up. His bronzed eyes were forever locked toward the eventless dirt surrounding him. About 30 feet to his right, orange and pink stucco walls blocked his view of the buzzing Hill Street traffic. Hector paused to look around for a moment and make sure he was 100% aware of the park's surroundings, as memories emerged of his parents playing Beethoven's music at their final piano. His eyes filled with tears that he wiped away on his sleeve. A text from Noah buzzed in his pocket, and as he exited the park, he was thankful for how efficiently the phone could distract him. The afternoon was hot, so he stopped into an air-conditioned cafe for a beer. Thoughts of Seattle greenery ran through his mind as he looked out the windows of the establishment to the golden afternoon sun hitting the dusted cement, steel, and parked cars. Long shadows stretched out to the pavement of the street. Some shadows were bending up walls at sharp angles, while others zigzagged up and down city steps.